Good morning, everybody. Yes, the elf on the shelf stroke Father Christmas or whatever the hell this guy is. He's like back on the microphone. So you can tell there's a Christmas thing happening here already. I think Jane is putting up our Christmas decorations this week. So, it's all happening.
Like you said, I'm a Grinch. We'll see it.
No, you're not so into this, huh?
Nah, Santa Claus. No. But like Gareth, Santa hurt me first. I never got a present from Santa. There's no Santa Claus where I come from. There's Santa Claus in the Eastern Cape.
Oh, there's nothing in the Eastern Cape. Santa Claus is the least of your worries. How about running water and electricity? How about jobs? That would be nice.
Yeah, that's what we should get for All I want for Christmas is the great economy.
All I want for Christmas is a province that fucking works. Yeah. Eastern Cape. People there crying. I want something for Christmas, please. Father Christmas, please. Father Christmas is like, I'm not taking my reindeer near there. It's dangerous for them.
I'm gonna hijack him.
Like if I bring my sleigh into the Eastern Cape, they're gonna steal all my stuff.
Right. The potholes are so bad in the Eastern Cape, you can't even fly Santa's sleigh. Can you imagine?
Yeah, exactly. The potholes will get you even when you're in the air. It's ridiculous. All right, so we are here. It is Tuesday, the 5th of December, and things are definitely happening. I see there's all the world's biggest bullshit artists are gathered at COP28 in Dubai. And what I love is that you got all these people from Western democracies. It's like all these left-wingers and these climate activists and these women, and they're all getting together and they're all talking about, we're going to have to change the global emissions and we have to get off fossil fuels. And what happens? The president of COP28, Sultan Al Jaber, says, there's no science indicating the phase out of fossil fuels is needed to restrict global heating to 1.5 degrees. He said, if you carry on like this, we'll all end up back in caves.
Yes.
And he's right.
Yeah, that is true.
So I like the way that the president of COP28 just basically told the rest of them that they're a bunch of morons.
I've never understood this
That's what he's done.
I've never understood this whole woke mentality, but that's a different thing, Gareth.
What mentality?
Like the woke mentality. Like
yeah.
This I want to save the world. The world was here before you. It will be here after you.
I'll explain it to you. You want me to try and get into the head of woke people this first thing in the morning?
Yeah, please.
Blow my nose so I can get ready for this. I have to get rid of my carbon emissions before I can start talking shit. There we go.
Exactly.
All right. So what happens is, if you have what like Fikile Mbalula has, which is struggle envy, you want to stand for something. You want to make a mark. You want to be living a life of meaning and purpose, but you don't really have any skills to do anything useful on planet Earth. You're basically a coddled first world politician who's spoiled rotten. Nobody takes you seriously. You've never really had a struggle in your life. You're living off other people's money, whether you're Fikile or one of these people at COP28.
Yep.
So what you do is you set up a goal which is unattainable so that you can't really be measured. Because if you have a goal that's attainable, let's say your goal is we have to close down 20% of the power plants by 2030.
Yeah.
Then you know how many power plants there are across the world. You know which ones you're going to close down. You start earmarking them now. You start saying we're going to replace that with this, this, and this. But you have like a proper plan. And plans do not include like windmills and solar panels, because you need so many solar panels and windmills to replace one coal-powered power plant.
Exactly.
That you'd cover an area the size of Lesotho. All right. And that's to replace not even the half of them. Anyway, they don't have a plan because all of this is completely ridiculous. You can't lower the temperature of the earth as a human being, or even as a group of human beings, even as a consortium of nations. Plus, the weird thing about the woke and the left in this case is that they're all anti-colonialism and anti-imperialism until it comes to cramming down their priorities on the rest of the world, especially the poor part of the world. So they go to countries like South Africa and Indonesia, for example, because apparently we've reneged. So we took $23 billion.
Yeah.
We took $23 billion, or our share of it, And then we didn't do what we said we were going to do.
Right on international level. So welcome, world.
Our government is so fucking bad that they will take money and go, yeah, we promise we'll do that. And we just ignore whatever the reasons were that we were given the money.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hilarious because actually this is money that they shouldn't have given us in the first place, because what they're doing is giving us money to keep doing what we were doing before.
Yes.
And it's not working. Plus, I mean, South Africa's carbon emissions are so low at the moment because our power stations don't even run, right? So we don't make electricity. So we're actually probably one of the least offensive countries when it comes to this stuff. But when you set up unattainable goals, like saying, for example, the world's getting hotter, what are we going to do? You're not going to do anything, because the funny thing about COP28, and I'd love to actually talk to one of these nutcase environmentalists, but I want to talk to them with facts, because I'm not even that well versed in this stuff, but I can see that there's a volcano in Indonesia that's just exploded, Sumatra somewhere. This thing is pushing out millions of cubic tons of CO2, methane, sulfur dioxide, and a number of gases which are absolutely positively detrimental to the greenhouse effects of the atmosphere. But at a scale and in a way that is just, it makes all the cars and all the cows and all the other things that humans are being blamed for, our carbon emissions are too high, all our power plants and all our factories. Listen, let me tell you, this volcano has probably dwarfed all of our contribution to global warming. In the next 10 years, we won't get close to the amount of shit that this volcano has just pushed out into the atmosphere. And that's not humans, that's the earth doing what the earth does. But these guys don't.
The counter-argument will be, we caused that. That's climate change.
Yeah, sure, we caused a volcano. Show me how. Show me how we actually affect the tectonic shifts within the Earth's crust, which we can't even...
for all that oil you guys love.
They're not doing that in Indonesia. And please believe me that a little drill, that's like putting a toothpick in a cake and saying that you're busy upsetting the balance of the cake. Okay. I mean... It's just absolutely unfathomably stupid. But I do love the fact that they take on, and this is kind of the mentality of a lot of people these days, is they find some unattainable goal or some nonsense that they can't actually be measured on. Because God forbid you should actually be measured. Like, okay, here's a goal. Take this state-owned enterprise and run it profitably.
Well, just break even.
Just break even. Right. That would be enough. Here's a house. Try not to let it fall apart.
Yes.
Here's a car. Try not to let it run out of fuel. Those goals are way too difficult for people who talk shit for a living. So they go to places like COP28 and they all sit there. And I saw Cyril over the weekend. Some idiot journalist asked him, Mr. President, are you happy with what's happening at COP28? Like, first of all, what a lame ass question.
Exactly, because I judge the journalist in this
Are
case.
you happy? I mean, what kind of a way is that to ask a serious question at a conference? Second of all, of course he's happy because he's sitting there talking shit. He doesn't have to be accountable. He's already been fingered for taking the money and not doing anything with it that he was expected to do. And we know these politicians are getting together, sitting around, talking shit, and then smacking each other on the back afterwards as if they've done something. And they haven't. They've done nothing. They've done nothing. Pope Francis sent his envoy, the Vatican Secretary of State, who's busy saying, well, we need an eco-conversion. We need to convert people ecologically like we've converted their souls as the Catholic Church. You got a lot of problems in that Catholic Church, Pope Francis. Chief among them is pedophile priests. Why don't you start with that instead of telling the rest of us to stop using electricity or to slow down our economies so that we all become poorer? Who do you think you are? Living off all that Vatican money, which has been either stolen or donated to you by true believers who have no interest in your climate change agenda. Who are these people? Anyway, we know why they're doing it. It's the same way as, there'll be activists for some stupid cause that nobody cares about, like the bring back our girls, which nothing ever happened.
Yes.
Everybody gets online and they're all like, bring back our girls. They're all holding up Michelle Obama with a sad face, holding up a bring back our girls sign. Where are the girls? Still nowhere to be found.
And
Probably dead.
on.
Probably, probably already been indoctrinated and or raped and or pulled into the mess that is Boko Haram. But you don't hear any more about that, So it's all these slacktivists. It's these people who like, I'm all for Palestine. And you're like, well, where were you when Yemen was happening? Where were you when the Kurds were being eradicated by Saddam Hussein with chemical weapons?
Exactly.
Where were you? No. You didn't have anything to say. I can't take these people seriously.
In recent history, China and the Uyghurs.
It's still going on.
Yes.
Right? So if you're so interested in like Muslim solidarity, what are you saying about the Uyghurs?
Yep.
Why aren't you when not Kim Jong-un, when Xi Jinping comes here, as he did not so long ago, where were all the people who were protesting outside the US embassy or the Israeli embassy when Xi Jinping came here? Where were they then? Oh no, you know what they were doing? They were shutting up and sitting down like good slaves because they didn't have the balls to stand up to an actual genocidal maniac. Much easier to make a noise about nothing and claim the credit.
Yes.
Please. It's just so unbelievable. Jesus was the original Klaus Schwab, says Congo Christmas. I love Congo Christmas. That's what he's come up with. Blessed are the meek is just biblical. You will own nothing and be happy. Well, socialists claim that. But I think, and I'm no expert on the Gospels or the spiritual text, but I will say that there's this idea that's come about in the last 100 years that Jesus was this hippie.
Yes.
Who walked around in tie-dyed cloth and smoked weed and chilled, and everybody was his friend, and like, love one another, man. Like, let's all get along.
Peace and love.
And they conveniently forget that he was actually a badass, at least some of the time. He turned over those money lenders' tables in the temple and smashed them with like whips and shit. I mean, he was properly angry. And, he certainly didn't mince his words about sinners.
Yeah, he didn't.
He was not this love everybody hippie. It seems like that's Christianity's become so soft too. I had this really interesting interview with a guy yesterday who you'll get to hear probably next week. He's a Muslim, well, an ex-Muslim now, who has some very interesting things to say about the comparisons between Christianity and Islam. And, you can criticize Islam, but at least Muslims know what their religion stands for. They know what's unacceptable in Islam. And there are a lot of things that are unacceptable in Islam. Christianity's become like this kind of broad church, if you'll pardon the pun, where everything's okay. You can do this, you can do that. Everything's acceptable. You be you, boo. And it's just bizarre, right? It's like, okay, well then, if you stand for nothing, then you fall for everything. Yes. And why are we worried about this? It's not a religion. It's just like a get together for people on a Sunday. It's like a social club.
But the minute you broaden the umbrella, the more you lose its core, Gareth.
Well, there we go. Yeah, you don't know what your actual principles are.
Exactly.
I mean, at least, if you leave Islam, punishment is death.
Yes.
Apostasy, the punishment, the prescribed punishment, there's no Muslim who's going to argue with this. They're going to say, yeah, that's it. So if you leave Islam, you must be killed. That's what they say. Christianity is like, well, you must just express yourself, and then you can find a charismatic church, or you can find a reformed church, or there's some kind of church for everybody.
Yeah.
And it's like Jesus is like, oh, whatever, anything goes. Which is not
true, because there's an actual book that tells you what goes.
Yeah, and Christianity not so long ago was busy like slaughtering people for not following the word.
Yes,
precisely. The Inquisition, all of that stuff. Yeah, it wasn't exactly all hippie and sandal wearing and fantastic. So let's be honest about that. But what do you think of COP28? It's a cop out, right?
I genuinely don't understand this nonsense, because imagine all these dignitaries going and talking about a problem that doesn't actually exist, especially for Cyril to leave actual problems in South Africa and go debate something that we don't have a problem with.
It's so hilarious. Like the ANC cannot pay.
Exactly.
The sheriff of the court arrived yesterday at Luthuli House and started telling them he was going to attach furniture.
Yes.
Like they have so little money. Luthuli House is so much in debt. You know that the guys who own the building want to chuck them out.
Yes.
Now, guards have locked the gates, defying the law. But Fikile Mbalula is in Algeria.
Yes.
Making friends with some bullshit guy we've never heard of.
Treating up a storm, right? Meanwhile, his house is burning and he doesn't even care about it. I don't understand this.
Teletubby.
Imagine, Gareth, to be, okay, cool. So besides the fact that they broke the law by locking the gates and not allowing the sheriff of the court in, thus again proving that they're above the law, or at least they think so. These people can't even afford to pay their bills. How can we trust them to run a country? 3 judges said, you guys lost this case. You guys should repay.
Yep.
They haven't done it. They are defying the law. This is not Zuma must pay back the money. This is not a people campaign. This is the actual law telling them to do something, and they're just like, nah.
They must lock someone up, and the chief person to lock up here is the Secretary General. Or the Treasurer General at very least. Put them in jail.
Yes.
It's not acceptable that, and I mean, remember, this is supposedly the party with a better life for all. Meanwhile, their own workers, the tea lady, the cleaner,
are not getting paid.
They're not getting paid, haven't been paid for months.
Exactly. Imagine what charity begins at home. Imagine how you treat your people.
Well, that's exactly right.
It's so funny that you bring up Fikile, Gareth.
He's such a joke.
I was talking to my friend. He calls me. He's angry. It's like 5 a.m. in the morning. He's like, I don't understand why Fikile Mbalula can make decisions for me. Meanwhile, he can't do anything else.
No, he can't. But what does he mean?
If he was no longer a politician tomorrow, what would he do? He has no reasonable skills.
No skill set.
Yes. He'll be unemployed and a bum.
There's nothing. Like Fikile Mbalula could not make himself useful in a marketplace.
So then over all the engineers, all the town planners, all
services.
The transport people in this country, we choose that guy. We're like, he'll tell them what to do.
No.
It's the blind.
And remember, he's also, he's fucked up everything he's touched.
Yes.
Remember, he was police minister for a little bit. Then he was minister of sport for a little bit. Then he was minister of transport for a little bit. And not in any one of them did he improve anything.
Thank you.
Nothing like got better. Again, it's like going to COP28 and saying, we're going to fix the climate. We're going to do.
Then we come back, a couple of years later, we find out the world got warmer because that's what the world does.
But with Fikile, those are attainable goals. Those are things that other people in those positions all over the world have managed to improve. Public transport infrastructure.
You don't even need to create anything here. You just copy something that works.
Right. No, he's done nothing better. In other words, everywhere he goes, he makes things shittier.
And he gets a new job for it as a reward.
But so the best job for him is the Secretary General job, because none of us care about the ANC, so let him fuck that up, right?
Yep.
Let him. I'm not going to complain if he screws up the ANC. It's probably the best place for him. He can't do any more damage. They're already a disaster zone. It's like going into Afghanistan and saying you're going to bomb it. Well,
it's like you're going to demolish you're going to demolish a building.
What are you going to do? Right?
Nothing you can do about it. Going to Afghanistan and bombing a building.
Anyway, I mean, we're not going to solve all the problems, but at least we can point them out.
We can make you angry this morning.
Yeah, we can point them out.
Yeah.
105 million in debt to a service provider, even more in debt to their own employees. The burnt-out husk of our parliament building is an embodiment of what South Africa has become under the ANC. Yeah, exactly. I think that is a very good metaphor. If you look at the parliament building, which they still can't go and sit in, they're still sitting in the Cape Town City Hall.
Yeah.
Cape Town City, thank God, is run by the DA, so they still have buildings where one brick is on top of another. But the parliament has to ask the city of Cape Town if they can use their city hall, because our parliament itself is a clusterfuck.
Yeah, because we can't go fix it.
Well, because nobody is taking responsibility for anything. And by the way, Fikile, you remember that stupid outfit? Ryan, please put up that picture of him with the Teletubbies, that outfit he was wearing at the Rugby World Cup final. I mean,
that yellow monstrosity.
What a stupid man-child. I mean, I wouldn't, and I don't have any fashion sense, but I wouldn't be caught dead in an outfit like that. If you gave it to me, I would say, look, this is too ridiculous.
Exactly. It looks like a costume.
Anyway, look at this. Speaking of ridiculous, let's change the subject for a second because I don't want to talk about politicians all morning. But look at this idiot. Here's Sam Smith at some fashion thing. What I want you to pay attention to here is not the outfit, which is stupid enough, because Sam Smith, don't even look at him because he's also ridiculous. He's just like, he doesn't even, this guy used to be a rising star in the world. He still is a talented musician, but with all of this gender non-binary nonsense, he dresses like a complete fool, like Fikile Mbalula. But he's fat.
Yes.
He's out of shape. He looks terrible. You can actually visibly see the signs of decline. It's like he wants to be as ugly and as bad as he could possibly be. He's like testing. Well, these idiots in the public will accept me no matter what. Just watch this video. Look at this. If you aren't watching, he's wearing like a skirt, black jacket, the most outrageous heels. They're like, and he can't even walk on them. He looks like a clumsy giraffe trying to walk in them. And underneath the comment the Sam Smith look at the Fashion Award is to die for. This is according to E! News in America. How can they carry on lying to us and expect us to just believe it? Like this is like me going up to you and saying, sure, but it's so cold outside on one of the hottest days in the year. And you
with a straight face.
And you must go, yeah.
No, but Gareth, you need to understand that you feel like it's cold, right? So I can't question your feelings. It's your truth.
Your truth.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think Sam Smith looks like
shit. You identify as warm or cold today.
I think he looks like shit, and yes. I think he dresses very badly, and I think his days are numbered. You can only get so far in talent, and his has run out. So you don't have to believe me. You can always believe E! News saying his look is to die for. Like which group of people is sitting there going, wow, that's a great outfit? Besides the crappiest people at these publications in the news media who are trying to convince us of like the earth is flat.
Yes.
That's the only people who believe that. No one with a brain is listening to that going, yeah, that's true. And they actually think, like someone in that office is going, isn't this just great? We've got to celebrate. Do you think they actually know that they are full of shit? Or do you think they really believe that that's great?
I think they believe in their own shit. I think that, have you seen Bob Iger speak about how Disney is a flop and he refuses to accept any mistakes because they chose an entire culture war.
By the way, Wish, the latest movie which came out,
bombed.
Oh, it's bombed so badly.
Budget of 200 million. Wish.
Marvels bombed so badly.
Yes.
Basically, Disney's dropping so many bombs at the moment, they're going to be roped into the Ukraine war.
The third superpower.
Can you imagine? Lockheed Martin saying, please, can we sign you guys up? You seem to be doing better bombs than we do.
But yeah, like, I don't get it. I don't get it. Go woke, go broke.
Here's the picture of Fikile with the Teletubbies. I mean, so you got, I don't even remember. Do you remember their names?
What? Poe, that's the purple one.
Right.
Tinky Winky.
Tinky Winky.
La La.
And
Fiki.
And Figgy Li. Look at him. What an idiot. This is the man who is in charge of this like extremely stupid, crazy, messed up situation at Luthuli House.
Yes.
He's the guy. I hope that when that cleaner or that tea lady or whoever it is that arrives there and hasn't been paid for months, I hope when she gets in, she sees this picture on the wall and goes, so that's the guy who's not paying me.
That's my boss.
Yeah. I mean, what an outfit that is. Can you even describe that? That makes Sam Smith look good.
I have told you this before. It is uncanny how much he looks like Mushe from Takalani Sesame. He looks like a character from Sesame Street.
Man.
That says enough.
Let's take a look at some of the news stories. We've got to get to JJ Cornish just now with Africanalysis, which is always one of my favorite things about a Tuesday. But first, let's take a look at some news. NUMSA has welcomed a judgment declaring load shedding unconstitutional. Well, it's fine if court declares it unconstitutional, but that doesn't mean that they're suddenly going to switch everything on and we're not going to have problems. So the National Union of Metal Workers, who are obviously really dense, they think this is going to mean whoop, everything comes on.
Yes.
You know, again, this is a union. What they should be doing is fighting for wages against the employers in the mine and metalworking industry. But they've become, because in this country, like, idiocy seems to be promoted beyond its competence. And all you have to do in South Africa is fail forward.
Yes.
Right?
True.
Which is like Fikile, we were talking about him just now. You fail at being Minister of Police.
Just keep getting a better job.
Then they pass you on to sport. You fail at that, then they put you into transport because it's got sport in it, so no one's really going to notice. This is honestly what I think they think.
Yeah, this is the best.
Well, just keep moving him. And then, like, now he's even messing with transport. And, like, Fikile is probably saying, I own taxis and he's making it difficult for me. Get rid of him. And they put him in Luthuli House as the Secretary General. And they send him to nonsense places like Algeria. I don't know how much trade goes on between South Africa and Algeria, but I'd be surprised if it's more than the amount of trade that happens on a Sunday at China Mall.
Yes.
Okay. But Fikile's there, like, he's being a big deal, and he's meeting with the leaders of Algeria. And not even the leaders, by the way. They're like the third tier.
Yeah, exactly.
Even the Algerians are like, we don't need to send our best people for this moron.
You won't even notice.
Let's give this clown something to keep him busy, and then he'll go back to South Africa. Because now he's on this huge mission. Apparently he wants to rename Santon Drive.
Yeah,
after some Palestinian activist.
Yeah. I saw that he signed the petition, and then he was there at Constitutional Hill.
Here's what's happened. So he gets all this attention now for his pro-Palestinian stance, which, by the way, I mean, it's not hard to get attention for your pro-Palestinian stance in South Africa, because there's a whole group of people who are just brought to life. These are people who have been dead on Twitter for most of the last 20 years. Suddenly
they have opinions.
Mention Palestine, and they just really wake up like the Walking Dead. And so Fikile is seeing this as an opportunity for fame, because that's all he wants, right? That's all he wants. He's got money, ill-gotten gains, and all that stuff. I mean, he lives here in Santon. He sends his kids to private schools. He's wearing outfits that cost more than your car. They look stupid, but they cost more than your car. But he really wants fame. So now every time he mentions from the river to the sea, someone pays attention to him.
Yeah.
And he just wants attention because obviously he didn't get enough hugs from his daddy when he was little. I don't even know if his daddy was around when he was little. That's part of the problem. But it's interesting that this is his thing now. So he hears about some woman in Palestine who's like an activist who was killed. Now he reckons we must name Santon Drive after her. It's like they've got so few ideas. You remember the EFF were the ones who suggested they change right, like William Nicol into Winnie Madikizela Mandela, and I think the ANC were like, "Oh, we should have thought of that." Now Fikile, who doesn't have an original bright idea in his entire
scrolling through Twitter, sees a tweet.
You could go through all the things Fikile knows. It'll take you 15 minutes. So he grabs one of these like tired ideas that the EFF came up with. Oh, they named that street after Winnie and it got some attention for them. All I want's attention. Maybe we should just name something after, I know, a Palestinian like activist, because then all those people will be cheering me on.
Yes.
That's all I want. It's just, I need the love that I didn't get as a child.
This man is a spotlight hog, Gareth. So when he was sports minister, I don't know, was it 2014? You know, he hired out Vivica A. Fox.
Yeah, you remember that?
Yeah, and then he just brought them to South Africa to the sports award for no particular reason.
No, except that he wanted to be seen with them.
Yes.
that he at that point, and who knows how the finances of Luthuli House are run. I mean, you know, people used to disparagingly say like a spaza shop, but honestly, I do not know a spaza shop that doesn't pay its people, because a spaza shop has to operate on market principles. Otherwise, they go out of business. So you can't say that someone like Fikile runs it like a spaza shop, because he should wish that he could run it like a spaza shop. If you gave him a spaza shop, he'd screw that up. Right. He'd bankrupt it. Problem is that when their coffers are empty, they find nefarious ways to dip into taxpayer money. Yeah, I don't dispute that. I think that's probably about right. He looks like an Ali G lookalike. That's also a good point. Carl says there must be a new portfolio for Fikile so he can be Minister of Pussery. Yeah. Congo Chris says, I remember in the 90s we were taught that access to electricity was a constitutional human right.
Yeah.
We should take ESCOM to the Court and demand the dissolving of the apartheid-era monopoly. Well, this is what they've done. So basically, there's this landmark judgment declaring load shedding is a basic breach in rights and ordering the electricity minister to take all reasonable steps to ensure critical state services aren't affected by it. But, when the economy is falling apart, when we can't run the country because electricity can't be provided, which is the case already, you don't need a court to then tell them, well, you've got to take all reasonable steps. You think that's going to change the minds of people who've already decided they don't care about the average South African or electricity provision? I mean, come on. Who are these people who think, oh, no, because the court said so. No, that's going to get government's ass in gear. Now you're going to see Jose Enzo Ramaphosa suddenly, oh, well, I better get going. The court told me to. The court told me to. So let me sort that out anyway. Comes in the back of a case brought by various groups from organized labor and civil society, as well as a number of political parties, with NUMSA as one of the applicants. So they obviously think that this is a big victory. But the reality is the court can't make Jose Enzo Ramaphosa, Cyril Ramaphosa, or Gwede Mantashe competent.
Yes.
The court can't order them to be competent because they don't have that in their wheelhouse. That would be like me telling Bakh'abantu to solve the global climate crisis. You just don't have that. I don't have that ability, and neither do you. So if I tell you to do it, that's not going to make you do it.
Doesn't change anything.
Yeah. The matric exam period has gone about without significant glitches. So this is from our basic, and very basic is the word, education department. Over 700,000 matrics sat for exams in 2023, more than 8,000 exam centers worldwide. The department's minister, Angie Motshekga, can you believe she's still there, urged learners to be patient before results were issued. She said a lot was done to support learners to prepare for their exams, like giving them the answers beforehand.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like the way Angie Motshekga, I think since Zuma era 2007, she's held the same portfolio.
It's amazing.
And I love how she improves, right? But the only way she improves, she rigs the results,
and she just brings the standard down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like if I keep lowering the marks,
we need
fail forward.
We need this year's matrics to look like they've improved on last year's. We'll just decrease the pass rate.
Like, because they have the actual metrics. They're like, oh, these kids are getting dumber.
And
let's just call them smarter.
They are observably getting dumber.
Yes.
And we have the lowest levels of numeracy and literacy on the continent.
Yeah,
there's a famous statistic now.
Let's not tell
people
about.
Yeah. No. But it is called basic education for a reason. This is the kind of basic that will make you so basic in society that you won't be able to get anything but a menial job.
Yes.
So well done on all that, ANC. As I said over the weekend, and we're going to start off first in a number of new shows. The first today is going to be Democracy 101. So we're going to look at why democracy is the system we have in South Africa, whether it is the best system, what you need to know about it, going back to basics. So when we say Democracy 101, it's like a crash course. And we're going to be joined by the IEC's Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, who's responsible for electoral operations, because these are the guys who make sure that the elections actually are legit.
Yeah, run, legit, ordered.
Yeah. So if we don't talk to them, how do we know that it's even worth going to the polls? Because that's how a lot of people feel anyway. Why bother? So we want people to vote. We want people to take a stake in their own future. We want people to know that it is their decision and their choice that will make this country better or worse. We can see the results of making the wrong choice because you just have to look at the ANC. And we've pretty much spent the last 35 minutes talking about how terrible they are at everything. So we're going to ask the IEC to explain the elections to us, explain how the polls work, what you need to know about when you go to the elections, as if you'd never known. If you're an alien who just landed on planet Earth, we're going to take you through it step by step. hold your hand along the way, so that we at the end of this have smarter people
Yes.
who can vote.
Exactly. Who understand what they're doing.
Right. Who can do something.
Yeah.
And then I see this story. You can buy an EFF gazebo today. You can visit the EFF's online store to make your purchase. They don't say how much it is, but I'll show you the graphic. Oh, they're 5,000 Rand each.
Oh.
Okay, so the EFF are resorting. This is very, very cool. So the EFF, who obviously need money because they blew it all on their FNB extravaganza, right? Here's the picture. You can buy an EFF gazebo. I know that Congo Chris, for example, is desperate for one of these. Imagine putting one of these up for your braai this weekend.
Exactly. You know how to make your Christmas special? Buy an EFF gazebo.
I actually think it would be like ultimately a kind of trolling.
Yeah.
I would almost, if I had like spare cash to burn, I'd buy 10 of these and give them to my friends who I know hate the EFF. Yeah. Just as a gag gift.
I'll just go drop them off with like all the Buddha.
Imagine you give it to like some right-wing friend of yours. Okay, register to vote EFF, it says, but you can go to the EFF's online store, 5,000 Rand for gazebo. Because they're so desperate for money, they'll sell that. Yeah,
but like they announced the manifesto launch, so they have to fill up those seats, Gareth.
I mean, you could probably get one with your name on it for less.
Yeah, probably.
And why wouldn't you rather
walk down to Small Street and get one?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Oh my God.
Still support the cause.
It looks like the ANC is growing in the Eastern Cape. Go figure. Well, that province is finished. We should cut it off and let it float to Antarctica. I know it's where you're from, but sorry. It's a disaster. They bought that from China for 2K. Might only last until the elections.
Hopefully.
Say what you want. That's a good price for a 6x3 gazebo, says Congo. This is a good deal. And give the EFF my card details, says Mapelo. Never. Can you imagine the fraud? I mean, these are the guys who ripped off VBS.
Yeah, these are the guys who didn't know what credit cards they were using. They're like, oh, I'm just using a credit card.
Yeah. And trust me, if they're going to rip off grannies in Limpopo who've put their life savings into VBS, they won't think twice about taking more than your
allegedly,
money.
Gareth. Allegedly.
I'm going to make counterfeit gazebos and sell them for $999 just to fuck with them, says Carl. Good. Do it. I'm going to go and buy that and go and live in Ventersburg or Oranje. Says Tom.
People are just stoking the fire.
We've become expert trolls.
Yes.
That's what we've become. I love that. What a great story. And then Spotify are going to axe 1,500 workers to cut costs. Surprise. Again, one of these big tech companies that's just got way too many people doing nothing.
Yes.
So, and you know, as AI starts to improve and machines start to take over some of the more repetitive, boring tasks that humans are not necessary for, you're going to see this happening more and more. And then these people will have something to worry about, not climate change, because they'll actually have to find a job. So apparently they're getting rid of 17% of their workforce. And that's 1,500 odd people. Chief Executive Daniel Ek said, made the difficult decision. With economic growth slowing dramatically, they employ about 9,000 people. And he said substantial action to right-size our costs was needed. The tech company's been expanding worldwide as it seeks to reach 1 billion users by 2030. Currently has 601 million of them, up from 345 million at the end of 2020.
You know, all these tech companies that are like based on this subscription service type thing, Uber, all these companies that basically went to IPO with billions worth of debt, right? So these companies like Spotify, this is the only way they can justify an improvement year on year on year on year. This is what Disney Plus tried to do. You lay off the workers and then you offset that as profit, but it's not really happening.
You're not showing real growth.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can only affect the balance sheet in two ways. You can have more coming in, or you can spend less.
Yes.
Right. So they're going for the second option because there's obviously not more coming in.
Exactly. And
apparently Disney lost 23 million subscribers.
Yeah.
Since Elon Musk told
and it still hasn't come
Iger to go and fuck himself.
Yeah, exactly. And it still hasn't come close to even breaking even to like in terms of the subscribers that they need.
You know, there was a time when Disney was like unassailable, right? They were such a powerful company. They were a juggernaut.
Yes.
And their share price was just going up and up and up. And they were buying Star Wars and they were buying all kinds of other franchises and they were just printing money.
Yeah.
And it seems to me like the shine has completely come off Disney.
And it's not the tools, Gareth. It's like what? Movies look better than they've ever done.
No, it's not the tools.
It's not the tools. It's the people at the helm.
They're not running it properly.
Exactly.
That's all you can say, right?
Because
it's fascinating. It's fascinating. And then there's this story, which before we get to JJ, the mother of a man suspected of stabbing a German tourist to death near the Eiffel Tower in Paris reported concerns about her son weeks before the attack. Nobody listened. You know, when your mom,
my mom is like kill the psycho.
Put this child in jail, and nobody listens. Anyway, 2 others, including a British man, were injured in the attack on Saturday. A 26-year-old French man was later arrested, and anti-terrorism prosecutors opened an investigation. France's interior minister said this was a failure in the alleged attacker's psychiatric treatment. Well, the part of the story they leave out is, guess what he was shouting while he was flailing around with a knife, stabbing people in his immediate environs? Guess what he was shouting?
Probably something anti-Semitic.
Allahu Akbar. Nobody talks about it. It's amazing how, like, he's telling you his motive. He may be a completely deranged lunatic, and by no means does he represent the average Muslim. Okay, obviously not. You have to say this because people are so dumb that they think that. This is not him being a normal, moderate, sensible, religious Muslim. This is him being a fanatical, nutcase kind of Muslim. But he tells you what his main motivator is, because apparently he was very upset about what's going on in Gaza, because there's all this noise on social media. So he felt, I better join in. And he's clearly a nutcase. So he goes out into the streets with his knife, and he wants you to know he's doing it for Allah and for Gaza.
Yes.
So when he does this, but of course, in the news, you can go to every one of the sites reporting this story, and you will find maybe 1 out of 10 that will mention that he shouted Allahu Akbar.
Yes. It's the only religion that still exists, that still still believes in the holy war and believes that
jihad is a part of.
Exactly.
It's a part of this is the central tenet of kind of the genesis of the Muhammad story is that he was a warlord, and there's no point in denying it. I'm not saying that all other religious leaders throughout history were all absolutely blank slates that had nothing nefarious or dodgy in their pasts, but the fact that let's just isolate this incident. It is material,
yes,
as the lawyers would say, that this is what his motivation was.
Yes.
So when people go, oh, wow.
It is the definition of being radicalized.
A guy just stabbed a guy. You're like, why?
I don't know, but...
Was it for his phone? No. Was it because he doesn't know any French? I don't think so. Was it because he doesn't like the geraniums in the window boxes of a certain flat in Paris? No, he's telling you why he's doing it. So it's material. So news media, report it.
Yes.
Stop hiding the ball. It's important that people know when someone attacks someone in the city.
Especially when we do know the reason.
This is a metropolitan city. Just the other day, there was a World Cup final in it. There are many tourists from all over the world who go there. It is incumbent upon you as the police and as the media in France and in the world to tell people why an attack happened. Then they can decide, well, I think I'll stay away from France. Or, okay, it's just one nutcase. But we need to know. Anyway, let's get to JJ. He's got some sensible things to tell us about what's going on in Africanalysis. Now, I suspect this may be our last Africanalysis for the year. So let's make a big fuss because we will be coming back with it next year. Johannesburg Business School are back, and they want to tell you even more about all of their programs that are happening, and they really are doing an excellent job. You can find out more by visiting their page on cliffcentral.com, or go and check out, especially if you're looking or someone in your family is looking to study at JBS next year, go and see what they offer. It's really worthwhile. They've got some amazing lecturers, some amazing courses. And as business schools go, people are doing their MBAs because it is a surefire way to have people take you seriously in the business world. You've got an MBA, and if you get one from JBS, you're getting a good quality MBA too. So go and take a look. But here is JJ Cornish, and the reason we talk to him is to find out what happens in Africa, our big and diverse and amazing continent. So JJ, how are you?
Bonjour, I'm immensely well, and I don't know why you suppose that I won't be here on the 19th? Is it because I wore that little crown of holly and danced with a champagne glass and made a fool of myself at your Christmas party? I'm over that. I'm over that.
You know, I saw you were holding court at the Christmas party. People were listening to you, telling stories. It was actually fascinating. We've got to do a full interview with you at some point, because we only get to see you on this show, once every 2 weeks, and it's for 15 minutes. So I think next year, we'll sit down and do a proper interview. You've had unbelievable experiences in your life that I feel like we need to hear some of those. So, Africanalysis, JJ, what do we got going on in Africa this week?
Who am I talking to? Am I talking to your little Christmas goblin? That's a Swedish goblin you have there. You know that.
Is it?
And they start. Yes, I have 2 Swedish grandchildren, and suddenly, out of nowhere, these 2 goblins appear at sort of time of Advent, and their lives change. And well, I don't know where they hide for the rest of the year, but once they come out, life. Of course, with 18 degrees below zero, they need everything they can. Poor little buggers. But that's a beautiful little thing you have. Now, I'm talking about Sudan to start with, and it's rather sad. The United Nations political mission there, and the acronym is UNITAMS, which stands for the UN Integrated Transition Assistance Mission in Sudan. It came in after the junta started fighting with the rapid support forces, leaving 25 million people in need of humanitarian aid, forcing 6 million people from their homes, killing tens of thousands. Terrible business. But United Nations can't be in an area if the authorities don't want them to be there. That's the way it works. So now the junta's not happy about them being there. They say, you've got to go. So UNITAM says, okay, we'll go. And take us 3 months to disengage. But don't for a moment suppose the UN is abandoning Sudan. We're there. And of course, they have had peacekeeping forces. That's something else entirely. That's done by the Security Council, determines to send them there. And they've had them in Darfur. They've had South African members of that peacekeeping force. And the situation in Darfur is absolutely dire. It was the world's worst humanitarian crisis. At the moment, of course, it's been eclipsed. But it's pretty sad what is happening. It's bearing the worst brunt of the fighting in Sudan. So we wonder what will happen. Why the junta can't stand to have UNITAMs there? Because of course it points to the fact that both the junta and the rapid support forces keep fighting, because the reality is both of them think they can win. And they don't mind what they're doing to the Sudanese people. They'll keep fighting, and somebody's got to be able to stop it.
JJ, we're doing a new show later on this morning called Democracy 101, and we're going to look at definitional things like, what is democracy? What is a republic? But you use the word junta, and I can see lots of people go, we know what that is. But it's important also for us to just kind of explain what these things are. There's been a very famous junta in Aung San Suu Kyi's, what is it called? Myanmar. Yeah. But in Sudan, it's basically any military group which seizes power, right?
Indeed, yes. It's also called that a coup, which is also called a putsch. And we're going to talk about a putsch later. But The thing is, the junta is then the military authority that rules the country. And, they have them all over Africa at the moment, sadly, with the return of the coups in Africa. As I say, we're going to talk about it in a few minutes. The thing is, though, you don't want juntas. With your democracy, I wish I'd known about it, because, I've observed elections in 13 African countries. And, it's all very well to talk about elections, but to have your elections come around every 5 years is very, very important to a democracy. But having elections doesn't make it a democracy. I mean, look at Zimbabwe, for example, and look at other countries. Look at Sudan has regular elections. Many of them do have. So that is important. but it's the operation of the system, that very imperfect system as it happens, in between the elections, that really makes a country a democracy. And I'm sure your experts are going to explain that to the viewers and listeners.
Yeah, I mean, we'd be talking to the deputy chief executive of the IEC, who's really, I think, the person who we need to speak to about our elections and how they work. But let's return to Africa for a second, because there's a newly formed alliance of Sahel states. Now, you've explained to us what the Sahel is. It's actually a region, and who are these states, and what are they trying to do?
Well, it extends.
What's their purpose?
Extends across the belt of Africa, above the desert, above the Sahara Desert. Mm-hmm. Now, the Sahara Desert, of course, divides South Africa into the sub-Saharan and North Saharan Africa. It's not the biggest divide in Africa. The biggest divide in Africa is the language divide between Francophone and Anglophone Africans, in my experience. Yes. But there were 5 members, G5, the group of Sahel states, where the jihadis are very, very, very active. And they were Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. And then Chad and Mauritania were members of this G5. And it was very much set up too by the French, who operated and believed that the answer to the jihadis was a military solution, which of course it isn't. It's a political and social solution. Why are people becoming jihadis? To die. And why are they prepared to die? Because fighting as a jihadi, fighting is the only form of job that these people can get. And life is so desperate that they're prepared to die to change it. Anyway, in 3 of those countries, sadly, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, there have been coups. And the regional grouping, ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States, said in the last one with Niger, unless you restore constitutionality, we will come in and do it for you with a military solution. So these 3 banded together, and Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, and formed this Sahel states, alliance of Sahel states, and said, an injury to one will be an injury to all. You come in here militarily and see what happens. Of course, ECOWAS would love to do it, Nigeria being the leader there, one of the leading countries, but to mount a military operation like that costs a huge amount of money. In fact, Gareth, unless you have the United Nations backing you, you can't afford to do it, and that's why ECOWAS hasn't done it. So these 3 have now withdrawn from the G5, which they see as sort of Western-oriented, and formed this alliance. And they were unable, the G5 was unable to stop the jihadis, and it appears, I fear, that this new alliance is not going to be able to do it either. And they've turned to people like the Wagner Group and to Russia, and they haven't managed to turn things around either. The point is, you've got to look into your own heart and see why. Why are the people fighting? Why are they doing this? Why are they prepared to die to overthrow us? Something has got to be wrong with this society, and that's what they've got to look at. And even though some of them might be nominal democracies in terms of votes, when the juntas take over, that's the end of it. And of course, they become red carded from the African Union. The African Union has, and it's one of its basic tenets, that if a country has an unconstitutional change of government, in other words, an overthrow of a democratically elected government, then it's red carded. It can't vote and it can't take part in debates at the United Nations. So it makes a bit of a mess of that very, very troubled region in Africa.
JJ, again, this is an area that's hardly known for its peace and stability. But is this actually going to feasibly hold these putschists at bay?
No, they're ruling now, and some of them have said, elections are not a priority. We've got to restore order. And the people who've had to endure the fighting, from these terrorists, effectively, are saying, well, the government was unable, and that's why Burkina Faso had not one but two coups. The government was unable to restore order. We've got to, let's hope the military can do so. And that is why, for example, the tailors in these areas are making Russian flags and making a fortune selling Russian flags. People go to the street waving Russian flags. It's an act of sheer desperation. And that's the tragedy of it. But the governments, I mean, they've got no chance of stopping the jihad because the attacks continue. And these soldiers, now part of a ruling junta, are dying in these attacks. So it hasn't changed the situation. It hasn't changed or brought stability, which is what the people are craving.
Let's just turn our attention quickly to Central and East Africa. I mean, Rwanda it continues to be held up by some as a paragon of kind of how Africa could operate if it had just a little more authoritarianism and some consequences for people doing things. But other people are also very interested in this deal that Paul Kagame has with the British, which is fascinating because the Brits are trying to export people they don't want to Rwanda.
Yes.
Rwanda gets money in return. They're trying to solve each other's very awkward problems in this way. How's that deal going? And what's happened with Paul Kagame's big plan with Rishi Sunak recently?
Well, the headline news is, of course, the death of the former Prime Minister Faustin Twagiramungu. I like to say these Rwandan names because you've got to practice them. They're not as difficult as the Madagascar names. But Twagiramungu, he died in exile in Belgium, and he was briefly the prime minister. He was a player, though, and he took advantage of the feelings after the genocide and was there. But he had fallen out with Paul Kagame, which is not a smart thing to do in Rwanda. And if you have, then it's a good idea to find somewhere else to live. Possibly not South Africa, because he's chased people into South Africa and killed them here. Sure. But anyway, Twagiramungu, he opposed Kagame in the elections in 2003 and won a massive 3.62% of the vote. Paul Kagame doesn't like to have anything less than about 95%,
Exactly.
So He was destined for deadly things if he didn't bugger off, which he did. But what is happening with this deal? Now, Rishi Sunak's trying to look like a tough guy. The courts have said we can't send the asylum seekers to Rwanda because there's a real danger that Paul Kagame will send them back to their country of origin, which is back to certain death. It's costing the British taxpayer, would cost more than 4 million rand per asylum seeker to send them to Rwanda, the 6,400 miles away from his trouble. He has promised we will stop the boats. These are little boats risking the lives of their passengers to cross the channel. Now, the numbers have increased, even though he has promised to stop it. And the British courts ruled the asylum-seeking exile absolutely illegal. So now he's gone and said, okay, I am now making a treaty with the Rwandans. I don't know what the terms of that treaty are, but maybe there will be in it a promise not to send them back to the country of origin. But in pursuit of that treaty and in honoring that treaty, I'm going to satisfy the courts that their misgivings about what could happen are incorrect. Now, happily, for those who are really concerned for these asylum seekers, and human rights groups and others definitely are, Rishi Sunak stands no chance of winning the next election. So it will be the Labour government that determines what happens. But in order to look like a tough guy, and Rishi Sunak trying to look like a tough guy is, I don't know, it's like me trying to look like a possible Comrades winner standing next to Bruce Fordyce at the start of that race, or maybe dropping one sleeve of my singlet so that I look like Josias Tangwere or something. It's just so silly. It's laughable. and happily laughable because, imagine being that desperate to leave your country and seek succor in the United Kingdom, and then suddenly be put on a plane and sent to some place like Rwanda, which nobody would want to happen. So that's a little drama that's going to play out until the election next year. I don't know. He's had to get rid of his cabinet minister, who just turned out to be, a crazy-mouthed woman. Tell me
about her.
I also want to hear about
she sounds exciting. Tell us, we can't wait to hear about her.
Well, she of course was the one that was saying that living rough and sleeping rough in England was in fact a lifestyle choice, and she was booted out once before and then came back.
You mean Suella Braverman?
Yes, Suella. It's not really her surname. She had another surname, which she changed that, I think, for political reasons. Now she's now the nasty person telling everybody how gutless Rishi Sunak was. That's the payment you get for bringing her back into government. But she happily, hoping she's going to disappear along with him at the next election. But she was the person who championed the Rwanda exile program, and I don't think she would have bothered with the court decision. She would have tried to ride roughshod over that one. Happily, he's got rid of her.
Okay. Well, it sounds to me like things are falling apart in Britain, and that's not even Rishi Sunak's fault necessarily, but it just sounds to me like it's chaos over there at the moment.
They
just don't know what to do with all these refugees, right?
Ask your democracy expert if Britain is a real democracy at this time.
Well, that's a good question.
How many prime ministers are there? Ask him if the United States is a real democracy at this time.
Yeah,
you've got a very interesting set of questions ahead of you.
Right, exactly. All right, well, thank you so much, JJ. Good to talk to you as always, and very useful information about what's happening in our immediate environs. And Africanalysis is brought to you by the Johannesburg Business School. We'll see you for the last episode on the 19th.
On the 19th, most certainly.
Very good. Thank you, JJ.
Thank you, JJ.
Lovely. JJ Cornish. That brings us to 7 o'clock. We're going to take a quick break. And then we've got more for you, including our first episode this morning of Democracy 101. Don't go away.
This week on the Auto Trader podcast.
Come on, we got to boil down to one car. Which is George's car of the year? Just one.
Just one. Just one.
You're not going to tell me.
I am. I'd say it is between the Mercedes-Benz.
Okay.
The one I damaged the rim on.
Uh-huh. I heard about that story.
Yeah. The EQ and the BMW iX3.
Okay.
That's
fair enough.
I'd say those two are my equal competitors for the year.
Mine has to be the Toyota Cross Hybrid.
I didn't spend enough time with the Toyota Cross. I think if I had the car like those, if I had the car for longer, I just took it literally for a drive.
Fair enough. But let's see what happens next year. It's been an incredible year, and a lot of the cars that came out this year were great. Let's see what happens in the coming year, 2024.
Catch us every Monday at 9 a.m. on YouTube and on autotrader.co.za.
Just because it's about technology, connecting your business to the rest of the world doesn't mean you need to send rockets to space and use complicated solutions. Want to simplicate things? Well, join Jaco Voigt, who is the CEO of Catalytic, on the Unbundled podcast. With skin in the game and a keen focus on educating and assisting you and your business, Jaco decodes all the aspects of connectivity, security, and cloud solutions. Unbundled is brought to you by Catalytic and is available on cliffcentral.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, it is time for our first episode this morning of Democracy 101. So we know next year we have an election, and I'd like to welcome to the studio, before we even carry on, Masego Sheburi, who is the IEC's Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, DCEO, who's responsible for electoral operations. It's not his first time in the studio, so Masego, very nice to have you back.
Welcome. Good morning, Gareth.
Very nice to have you here. All right, so let's begin, because the whole purpose of this new series of podcasts is to help people understand what kind of a political environment we're in South Africa. And I don't mean with the parties or any of that stuff. I mean, what is the system that South Africa subscribes to? What is the kind of government? What is the structure of the institutions around our democracy? And I think let's just start off, because we did a little test around the office the other day. We asked everybody who works here. It's not a huge group of people, but we said, what is democracy? And Masego, we saw 8 different versions of what democracy might be. People have an idea of what they think democracy is, but I don't know if they actually go and look up the definition. Yeah. And when you look it up, it says a system of government by the whole population or the eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. And I think it's become like a rallying cry. But, you know, Nazi Germany was technically a democracy.
Yes.
You know, people will say that China is a democracy. They will say that the United States is a democracy. These are very different countries. And they'll say that South Africa was a democracy from 1994 because all the population got to vote. But here you see in the definition, it says
eligible,
all the eligible members of a state too. So in countries where they restrict voting, or where only men get to vote, or where only property owners get to vote, they could also have called themselves democracies. So it comes from ancient Greece, where I think it was first used, where they used to actually have all the men in the town would meet. I think it was every couple of days, and they'd pass laws. And they didn't have representatives, so actually every single person who was eligible could pitch up. And if there was a quorum, they would vote. That's how they'd make the rules for the society. Obviously, these days, I think it's evolved to a point where people think democracy includes a lot of things which it might or might not, depending on the nature of each state. But in South Africa, the reason we care about democracy is because it came at the end of a long struggle, in which, before it had changed in 1994, we had a minority of the population deciding everything for the majority of the population, which is unsustainable long term. It was part of the reason that things had to change in South Africa. Plus, you can't deny people the vote and continue to be a legitimate government if, 80% of the population has no say and no interest in who are governing the country. That government isn't really legitimate, is it?
No, it's not. And you have no need for me, Gareth, because your historical introduction is very spot on. You've answered the question that you've asked.
Well,
the evolution is that every person must be involved in arranging the public affairs of their community or their country. But with population growth, it is not possible for people.
We can't all gather on the hill like they used to in ancient
Athens.
Athens.
A tree to have
exactly.
to have a say on every aspect in our community, and therefore democracy has evolved to what we have in South Africa: a representative democracy with elements of participation in it. In other words, every 5 years, we elect men and women who hopefully will arrange our public affairs in our interest, so that we don't have to gather ever so often to give a decision on every little aspect. It has components of participation in that in making laws, Parliament is enjoined to undertake meaningful public participation. in passing budget, municipalities and indeed provinces must have an element of involvement by the community so that people reaffirm what their priorities are in terms of how state resources are redistributed. So in crisp terms, democracy in South Africa is just a process of selecting men and women who organize our public affairs
but
on
then,
our behalf.
Because you're jumping ahead on some of these things, because there are two other things. When people describe South Africa, they go, oh, it's a democracy, which we are. I mean, there's no way we don't fit that definition I gave earlier. It worries me that less people participate in our democracy than in some other countries, but we'll get to that in a second, because that's part of what the IEC is trying to do, is to get more people involved. And I think it's what everyone in this country realizes needs to happen, because whichever government manages to get the most people to come to the polls and vote for them, that government has they have a mandate from the people, and they have extra legitimacy. But the other two terms that people use to describe South Africa, and maybe you can help us just factor these into it too, is people say, well, we're not a democracy, we're a republic, because we're the Republic of South Africa. You know, that's actually our... it's just, I think your Waze is telling you.
It's trying to give me answers. My apologies.
Your Waze is trying to answer questions about the Republic.
Yes.
But the Republic is part of the system, because we are a sovereign state, right? And a republic means you have people who represent you. So it's democracy, but it's also a republic, because we can't all go to parliament.
Yes.
So that's correct.
Indeed.
A state in which the supreme power is held by the people and their elected representatives, and which has an elected or nominated president rather than a king or a queen.
Yes. So a republic then is a departure from feudal times, from monarchies, from anointed leadership to elected leadership. But in there are also, the republic also speaks to the construct of the state, where the concept of separation of powers become to emerge. For example, you have a legislative arm that holds the government accountable for their performance, and you have a judiciary which is independent, which interprets the law. So you have the three branches of the state that hold each other accountable. Their roles may be complementary, but they are distinct characters of the state.
And then people also add the word constitutional to our definition.
Yes.
So now, instead of just being a democracy, we have to take into consideration that actually we are a constitutional democracy, which is also a republic.
Indeed. And that goes to your definition earlier on to say, in pre-1994 South Africa, you could call it a democracy, but it was not a constitutional democracy. It was a parliamentary democracy, because whatever parliament said, the court enforced. So in a constitutional democracy, parliament, however powerful, is still subject to the constitution, like every one of us. So each of the three arms of the state are judged against the constitutional standard. So actions that are inconsistent with the constitution, however powerful, however the person who makes those decisions, stand to be struck down because they are inconsistent with the constitution. In simple terms, the constitution now reigns supreme. It's
that is the supreme law of our land.
The law that is made by Parliament.
And in our constitution, it provides for how things will work, including elections, which we'll get to in a second. This is your area of expertise. But I think it's really important that we establish these things up front, because people aren't taught this at school, sadly. We don't have civics as a subject. And I think it would probably be a good idea, if government are looking at matric exams at the moment, and looking at next year, and looking at what they can do in basic education, it would be a good thing for us to start teaching the young people of this country what they've inherited and how hard fought this inheritance is. Because it's not just to be ignored. And we've got lots of young people in South Africa who are extremely apathetic, who are not necessarily involved in even the 5-year cycle of elections. They're not even involved in the day-to-day institutional democratic structures, which need them to survive and to thrive. So I think this stuff is massively important. There are three branches of government you just mentioned already. So this is the legislature, which means this is the body which makes the laws.
Yes.
They are elected because we we elect parliament.
Yes.
Parliament then chooses the president.
Indeed.
We don't have separate presidential elections like in America. So what we do when we go to the polls is we're essentially voting for parties that will, or individuals that will be in parliament.
Yes.
Those people are entrusted to make the laws.
Yes.
They also, from parliament, will select a president.
Yes.
And usually the majority party will choose that
The
president
yes.
because he needs enough votes to get 50+1.
Mm-hmm.
And then he establishes the executive, which is the second branch of government.
Indeed.
That executive is charged, as opposed to parliament, which is there to make the rules. The executive is there to enforce the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get the third branch of government, which is not elected. These are judges, the judiciary,
Mm-hmm.
the courts, which under the Constitution are there to apply the Constitution and to apply all the laws that Parliament creates against the Constitution,
Yes.
which is why you hear so often in the courts that a certain law is unconstitutional and is struck down. Judges, of course, are appointed for life so that they don't have to answer to politicians.
Mm-hmm.
And many people have problems with the judges. There's a big situation that was going on before October the 7th in Israel about judicial reform. But essentially, as the IEC, you don't have very much to do with the judiciary, except that they will occasionally rule that something you're doing is correct or incorrect according to the Constitution.
That's correct. And part of the constitutional construct, the Constitution goes a step further and creates certain institutions which it tasks with the responsibility of ensuring constitutionalism. We are one of those.
And famously,
Electoral
we've got our
Commission.
Chapter 11 institutions.
We are Chapter 9 institutions.
And
yes.
Chapter
And
9
you have institutions like the Public Protector, you have
Right.
the Auditor General. So we all come together under the construct of democracy, and we have specific roles in enforcing certain elements of the Constitution. Our part is to make sure that we give effect to the promise of regular, free, fair elections on the basis of a common voters' roll and for all adult citizens. So that is our role in ensuring
what you guys do is
democracy.
so important because the IEC, first word is independent.
Yes.
Yes.
You can't be influenced by the political parties.
Mhm.
And people are very nervous about that because we've seen in so many countries, including the United States, where people are influencing elections. There are lobbyists, there are politicians themselves, the structures of these political parties that try to influence things and not always in a good direction. So independence, the first important part. But based on that description of how government is meant to work, you guys come right at the start of it. Because if there isn't an IEC to make sure that the elections take place, everything else falls apart. There won't be a parliament because we won't have elected representatives.
Yeah.
Then parliament can't form an executive.
Mhm.
And there's no one to test any laws against the judiciary.
Mhm.
So the IEC is tremendously important. And they've just, am I right to say that they haven't really given you an increase in your budget because the IEC needs a lot of money to run. You need to employ people, you need to set up polling stations, you need to demarcate areas which will form municipalities or wards.
Mm.
Those wards and municipalities need councillors for in the local and provincial elections. So there's a lot of work that goes on here. Have you got enough money?
Let's put it crisply. Yes, we have enough money to run a decent election next year.
You're the only guy in the whole country who says you have enough money. There are
We
private
think we
businesses
could do
that-
with more, but
right.
we are mindful of the other competing
Interests.
interests in the country: healthcare, education, crime fighting, and those type of things. But the resources that the South African public has placed at our disposal are enough for us to run a decent election next year.
All right. And you do this every 5 years, the national elections.
Indeed.
So the last one we had 5 years ago, well, it's now just 4 years ago, but it will be 5 by the time the next ones roll around. These are the ones that have established the government which has been governing South Africa for the last 5 years. But that party's been in power now for 28 years. So we're getting up to 30 years. Democracy is turning 30 next year too, which is a big reason to celebrate. Are we concerned about those free and fair terms that you used earlier? free and fair elections still very much something that South Africa can be proud of?
It's something that we must always aspire to. It's something that the Commission judges jealously, because if you remove that, there's no reason for the Commission to exist, or at least in its current form. So that is a constitutional promise. It is not something that we do because we like. But the good thing is that with a number of court decisions, the concept has begun to be distilled so that there is meaning to the words, because other than that, it was just words, free and fair, and every player would interpret it the way they want to interpret it. It's a difficult concept. We went to the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court told us there's no golden standard. There's no universal standard that defines free and fair elections. You run an election within a context. You do your best. And if someone is not happy with the outcome, or they think there were elements that were not free, that were not fair, that rise enough to go to the heart of those elections, that person can go to court to challenge that election. But from our part, we understand free and fair election to mean that all persons who are eligible to participate must be able to participate. In our case, there is a regulation requirement that a person must be registered on the roll before they can.
But let's just start before that, because in order to qualify for a vote in South Africa, you need to be a citizen.
That's correct.
So you can't be a citizen of a foreign country.
No.
You have to have an identification of some kind, because when you go there, they need to know it's you who's voting and not someone who died 5 years ago.
Indeed.
You need to be over 18.
To vote, yes.
Are there any other conditions?
No, you need to be over 18 to vote, but you can register when you turn 16.
Okay. Yeah. So registration then forms the next level of qualification. And then after that, you must just appear on voting day.
On voting day, yes.
Who decides when voting day happens?
For national and provincial elections, the president, in consultation with the premiers, decide on the day. They don't have carte blanche. Is
there a window period?
There's a window period. Yes, the Constitution tells us.
Cyril can't decide. Now we're going to do this in November.
No, because the Constitution tells us that an election must be held within 90 days of the end of term. The current term was inaugurated in May 2019. Its 5 years will lapse in May 2024.
So it has to happen.
From that day, within 90 days, that's the window period. You can't go and call an election beyond the 14th of August, 2024.
So I'm going to read this question for you, because I think this is going to deal with a lot of the concerns people have around free and fair elections, the independence of the IEC. People are justifiably concerned because we've seen this breakdown in many other countries. And, we've seen conspiracy theories crop up everywhere. So Congo Chris says, please ask your esteemed guest what backstops and oversight there is in place to ensure the independence of the IEC. I, as a registered voter, have lost faith, and I fear that the IEC has been captured.
Okay.
Put his fears at rest. Tell him what you know to be true.
All right. The structure of the IEC is as follows. We have the administration headed by the chief electoral officer. We are the people who run election, administer elections. However, we report to what you could call a board, for want of a better word, a commission made up of 5 individuals, one of whom must be a judge. Okay. So they are responsible for the first line of defense, providing oversight over the administration. We report to Parliament via the Portfolio Committee on Home Affairs. And we also have a system that has served us very well, that we've imported to most of the jurisdictions that run election, called a political liaison committee, where we have structured interaction with political parties and contestants, so that we share information related to the planning for elections, the data that we have at our disposal. To allay Chris's fears, a person appears only once on the voter's roll. You can't appear more than twice with the same ID number. You are registered against a single segment, meaning if you are registered in Sandton, you can only vote in Sandton. You can't vote anywhere else, because your name will only appear on the Sandton segment of the voter's roll. 3, on voting day, we have contestants that are represented by their agents at voting stations, who can raise objections against a person being allowed to vote, a person not being allowed to vote. The presiding officer must deal with that objection. If the party still remains aggrieved, they can raise an objection with the commission, and the commission is in law bound not to release the result until it has dealt with all the objections. Counting of votes happens in front of agents at the station, so we do not move ballots after we vote. We turn the station into a counting center. We count in the presence of party agents. Parties will sign the result slips to ensure that they agree.
And they can all see, they bicker and they fight with each other, but they can all see what's going on.
What's going on. They can even take images of the result slip. And when we finish counting, we leave one copy of the result slip at the station as a public announcement that these are the results for this station. So that even in transit, if we try to fiddle with those results, people have a copy of the result that was left at the station. When we get to a local side of the IC, the first thing we do is to scan that result into an image. And we start a process of double capture. We employ independent firm of auditors that audit each result slip to show that even on election day, 2 + 2 still remains a 4, and not a 4 for other parties and a 6 for one other party.
Right.
And at that point, the parties then have access to those results the same way as the media has, the same way as we have. So we do not have sight of the results a minute or a second earlier than any other person. So we receive the result at the same time as parties, as media persons. So, and at that point, people can then compare the results that we've captured into our system against the result that their party agents signed off at the station. If there are discrepancies, they can raise an objection. And
I've been to the election center for 2 elections, and I've seen it myself, and it's amazing how quickly those results come in. I mean, you see some of the results that even in America, it takes sometimes when there's a disputed area weeks to sort it out. We've never had delays that long, have we?
No, we've not had delays that long. We've had instances where results were overturned because 2 + 2 was something other than 4. And when an objection is raised, the commission looks at these things, and in most instances they'll say, let's recount in the presence of party agents so that we can reconstruct the result. In most instances, the results are confirmed, but in last year's election, 2021 elections, we had 11 such instances where a result had to be changed after they were announced.
And people who say, well, you know, because you hear these conspiracy theories, it usually comes from people who are not very well informed in the first place, but that, for example, oh no, they will bus people in from, I don't know, Mozambique, Lesotho, Zimbabwe, that these people will suddenly be allowed to just join the voters' roll on voters' day. That's impossible to do. You
compile a voters' roll ahead of each election, and the number of things must coexist for that eventuality to arise. One, when you present your ID document, we scan it, and we instantaneously compare it against the National Population Register, which is a database of all citizens housed and maintained by the Department of Home Affairs. Right. If Home Affairs confirms that that ID number belongs to a South African citizen, only then do we include you on the segment of the voters' roll. You must provide us a description of an address where you reside, and against that, we register you against that segment. Before an election, before the CO certifies the voters' roll for use for an election, we make that voters' roll available for that purpose.
How many people are on the voters' roll at the moment?
Speaking, we have 26.8 million South Africans on the voters' roll.
It's a lot of people there.
It's a lot of people.
But it's still not even a half
of the eligible voters. Population. What population is that?
The Stats SA estimates that there's 38 million age-eligible citizens. So of those, there's 36 million on the voters' roll. So the gap is about
10.
Over 11, 12 million.
Just before we move on, because I know Bakh'abantu's got questions for you too, just tell us about the Chief Electoral Officer, Sai Mamabolo, because you know, it's useful to know these people. We've met you before here 4.5 years ago, but tell us about the Chief Electoral Officer.
Sai Mamabolo is a South African, born and bred in Tembisa. He went to Wales, he worked for IDASA, he worked for government for a stint. He's a child of the IEC, if I could put it that way. A consummate professional, a very ethical person, a frugal personality, and I'm proud to call him my boss. And it's been so for I've started working with him in the IEC in 2009, and the level of consistency is just surprising. But above all, he's just a patriotic South African who
and he's been to, among other countries, Australia, Botswana, Brazil, Ghana, Liberia, Mexico, Mozambique, Panama, Zimbabwe, to see how their elections happen. And also he was part of the program for the preparation of the 2006 presidential and legislative elections in the DRC.
If there's a project that stretched the country, it's that project, because we had to step in to help DRC with the first ever democratic elections in 2006. He was one of two key people who were responsible for that project. Incidentally, he's the CEO. The former other gentleman who was intimately involved is Musoto Miapia, who is now our chairperson. He was the DCO, or Deputy Chief Electoral Officer. He became CEO. He's now the chairperson. Sai was the head of the province in Gauteng. He became Deputy Chief Electoral Officer for Operations and subsequently was appointed. Yes, I have a difficult job because I sit on a chair that two former people sat on, the chairperson and the CEO. So I can't innovate too much, because we try to innovate. They tell you, no, we tried that 5 years back. It's not a new thing.
What sort of training do you do with IEC employees and the people who, because a lot of people will also on election day volunteer, but to make sure that the people on the ground know what they're doing?
Okay. Before I come to that question, there's a question that you asked earlier on. We have a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Basic Education. We have developed civic content for young persons at primary level, for senior secondary schools, and for high schools.
Okay.
So through that memorandum, we do a focused period called School Democracy Week to align with the month of April.
Is that being done now?
It is being done now. It has been done for a number of years. But our key is to infuse that content into the curriculum so that it's not seen as a standalone thing. Whether it becomes part of life orientation or any such content, I think it is important. It is impartial information, which tells you about the construct of the state, how you hold those elected to account, how you elect them, and all those type of things.
That is what my question was actually around. It was about, in terms of fairness, wouldn't you say voter education is also important in that? And do you guys ensure that people know these things so that you don't have people not trusting the election? You have people understanding how the machinery works. Not an expert level like you, obviously from the inside, but in order to be comfortable in the system, you need to understand how it works.
Indeed, if you go to first world countries or Scandinavian countries, their electoral systems work as well as they do because of the level of information and the level of sophistication among the population, and because people know what can be done. Those elections are very simple to run. The level of trust are very high. Take, for example, South Korea.
Yes.
We have in South Africa about 7 safety features on a ballot paper, just because so that you increase the level of trust in the outcome of the elections. In a country like South Korea, they just print that thing at the voting station in black and white. They mail it to people by mail. People complete those and return it to station. And that is perfectly good because it accords with the culture of that country. So information and knowledge is a key constituent part in the life of a democratic state. So when we have people who are informed, they can decipher fabrications from truth. They can see from manifestos. They can ask pointed questions. So we hear you're going to do this, but if the country's your economy of the country is performing at less than a percentage, how are these things going to be funded? So the engagement becomes very key in allowing people to make a decision on an informed basis, so that it's not just a banal identity of tribe, of race, and all other considerations.
And then in terms of like holding people accountable, who watches the watchman? Who keeps you in line? Who keeps the man on the ground counting the ballots in line? Okay. Is it a trust system? Is it an ethical system? Are you guys held to some kind of code?
We want to believe that we are saints, but we build a system for sinners. So there's checks and balances. The people that we use at voting station, we recruit them from members of the public.
Yes.
There's a criteria that we've developed together with political parties that says we do not want a person who was a candidate in an election for a party, a person who has held an elected office in a party. We're looking, because elections are very cutthroat. We need a person with some relative level of supervisory experience to withstand the rigor during the elections, to manage the station. So once a person meets that requirement, we recruit them, we train them, and since COVID, it has allowed us now to do at least 2 of our modules on a virtual platform. And that way, that is the basis on which we confirm people. You go there, you apply, we shortlist you, we make a test available to you. Based on how you perform, we confirm you as an employee of the Electoral Commission. And from then on, you go to the actual physical training on election management. We had looked at an accredited course that could be accredited by a university, so that if a person has that qualification, we know that there is some level of knowledge that is in that person. We've not made a breakthrough in that, but it's something that we are persisting with. And once we've appointed those people, we give their names and the station at which we're going to deploy them to political parties to say, here are the list of people that we intend to use. Raise your objection against the acceptability on the basis of the criteria. So we don't do that on our own. So parties will come back to us and say, we know this person. He has a high political profile in the community that we want to use him in. We object to their suitability. And in all instances where the objection is sustained, the commission will replace that person.
So, Masego, there was a big registration drive just 2 weekends ago. And I don't know what the numbers there were. Perhaps you can enlighten us a little bit. Were you satisfied with the number of new registrations and people who had lapsed as voters, who are back on the voters roll?
Let's put it this way. Over the 2 days, we interacted with a minimum 2.9 million people. 2.7 million of those are people who took the time, walked or drove to a voting station.
Right.
The balance 196,000 are people who had registered themselves using our online registration portal. Of those 295 people, the majority were people who were already on the roll. People who came out to inspect their details, to check if their address is still linked to the voters' roll segment in which they are registered. The new registrations that yielded from that were about 526,000 first-time entrants on the voters' roll. The majority of whom, or about 78%, were people in the age category 16 to 29.
Yes.
So while we're starting at a very low base for young persons on the roll, we are encouraged because in the 2 election cycles, the majority of people who registered for the first time were young persons. And we also know from the 2021 elections that once registered, young people are 10 times more likely to vote than any age cohort.
Really?
Yes. In 2021, of the 71 of the first-time entrants, young persons, 18 to 29, 71% of those who registered for the first time in 2021 came out and voted on voting day. So there is yet hope if we talk to young persons in the language they want to be spoken to, on platforms they want to be spoken on. But more importantly, if parties give them reason why they should continue to be invested in democracy as a preferred way of organizing public affairs.
Well, it is the responsibility of the parties to make people enthusiastic, to sell them a message that makes them want to go and vote. But a lot of young people in South Africa have just never participated. They've never bothered to register. They don't have any interest in any of the parties. They're not really won over by any of the messaging that those parties are putting out there. Whose responsibility is it besides themselves? And really, I mean, I don't understand how people will choose in a democracy that is as hard fought and as hard won as ours is. and where we have the history we have, I don't understand why someone wouldn't take advantage of this right. It's one of the most important rights you have. You know, if you took it away from people, I often think it would be really funny if the IEC had to go around saying, right, if you haven't voted in the last 3 elections, we're removing your right to vote. And then you'd see people suddenly go, no, you can't do that. They'd be outraged.
Yeah, that'd be outraged.
You know?
We deliberately don't use terms like apathy to ascribe to young persons, because from the long research that we've done, we're gleaning a number of lessons, some intuitive, some almost counterintuitive. Young persons are engaged with the affairs in their country. They just choose not to express those via formal political structures. The message that they tell us is that they have no faith in key political institutions, which includes political parties and government. So even if we speak to them, it's like speaking to a person who doesn't believe in childbirth and you come as a midwife. They have no need for your services. So, but we know what drives young persons' alienation. They say parties are inward focused. They have no concern with what happens in the country, but only with themselves. But strangely, they say that once elected into public office, parties behave in the same way. So there is a lot that must be done by parties themselves to rebrand them and appeal to young persons.
Speaking about appealing to people, let's not talk about people who don't want to vote, Gareth. Let's talk about people who want to vote, living abroad, right?
Sure.
Good.
So
yes, people living abroad. Good question. It's a huge category of people.
How do they go about registering? How do you guys manage elections in probably embassies around the world?
Yeah. For a number of elections now, South Africans abroad have been able to vote. We will announce sometime this week the opportunity for South Africans abroad to register at the embassies overseas. Sometime in Jan, we'll have 3 consecutive days where people can register. We are also finalizing and testing online platform to make it available to South Africans overseas, so that instead of traveling from Sydney to Canberra, a person can register online and they are on the voters' roll. Thirdly, in 2021, Parliament amended the law to make it even easier for South Africans who are already living abroad, who are already registered to vote. Before then, the law required that if you are registered, let's take, for example, in the UK, in South Africa House in London, over and above you being registered there, you also had to give notice of your intention to vote in London. So that requirement has been removed. We treat them like South Africans in the country. We assume that if you are registered against an embassy, you will go to that embassy to vote. Only those who, for example, registered in the UK, but know that they'll be in France on election day, only those need to give us a notice so that we can make allocations for them in France. We will have a registration drive for South Africans abroad. We will have a portal on which they can register themselves. We will have a period of advanced voting for South Africans, which is typically 7 or so days before the elections in the country, where people can vote in embassies. We finalized our agreements with the Department of International Relations, who's responsible for managing those elections on our behalf. We finalized training content that will now start rolling out to them. London remains our biggest mission. Canberra, Dubai is a growing mission. I think New York, and Nigeria, strangely, has a lot of activity, and I think Cuba.
Okay, well, I mean, if people in Sydney don't have to go to Canberra, that's a big move.
No, they still have to go to vote in Canberra, because the voting station is only the embassy. For registration purposes,
Canberra is the middle of nowhere in Australia. I mean, if most of the people, obviously the people in Perth, they don't get to vote then.
Yes, unless they can physically travel to a station, they will unfortunately be unable to vote. There were moves for Parliament to consider broadening voting stations beyond just embassies. But then you go into equity of treatment for voters, because there will be jurisdictions that are friendly diplomatically to South Africa that will allow you to have other areas other than embassies, but the majority of countries will say, no, we only recognize your embassy, and that's where you operate. You can't go opening up.
So here's an interesting
stations.
question from Carl. He says, if every single person abroad did vote for a single party, how many seats would they get in parliament?
If every single person voted overseas for a single party, it's a difficult one to answer. Let's answer it this way. For the last elections, 2019, we had, I think, 28 million South Africans who were registered overseas.
Wow.
Of those, about, 18 or 12 million, I stand to be corrected, about 18 and 12 million voted. If they voted for
overseas people,
not millions, sorry, Gareth. I didn't say millions.
I was going to say, wow.
My apologies.
Sorry.
28,000.
28,000.
Yes,
okay.
And of those, around 18,000
voted.
Yes, and if you vote overseas, it's like me voting in the country, but outside the province where I'm registered. I only get the national
vote. You don't get the provincial.
So those persons, 18,000.
How many seats is that?
Votes will not get you
not even one
seat, not even a fraction of a seat, because on average, a seat at the National Assembly would be about 90,000 votes. But you could get a seat if all those people voted for a single party. That party could get a seat on the highest remainders. Otherwise, after you've allocated seats on the full quota, and there are still seats that remain to be allocated.
If it matters to you, you must make the necessary arrangements. David says, I'm in the middle of Saudi Arabia. I don't think he has much chance, but is there any chance he could vote at the embassy in Riyadh?
We will imminently receive the listing of all embassies.
Okay.
And then we'll place that on our website. In the last elections, we had 121 missions, but as we understand, we do not have missions in every country. But if we have a mission in Riyadh, he would be able to vote in Riyadh.
So here's a question, which is a question for Parliament, not for the IEC, but it's still an interesting one. Why do we allow a criminal class to participate in voting? Surely being jailed should disqualify someone from having a vote. I mean, there are countries where they don't allow criminals to vote.
In South Africa, the right to vote was not automatic for prisoners.
Wasn't automatic?
No, prisoners only started voting, I think, in 2009, following a constitutional court challenge. I just forget the name, it's not Rechter. I think it was Necro versus Minister of Home Affairs and the President.
Probably Necro.
So they went to court to argue that
So do you open up voting stations in prisons?
We register prisoners. We go in January, we'll go into all the prisons, register inmates. And on voting day, we send our teams in voting stations, into prisons.
Do they get special training?
We administer the votes there, and we count the votes outside of the prison.
Yes. Okay. More people have moved provinces, so they can vote anywhere on the national ballot, but if they haven't changed address, they can't vote in the provincial ballot. Is that correct? Patrick wants to know.
As a rule, the rule is a person registers and votes against a voting district in which they are ordinary residents. So if you've moved address, even within a province, just go on our online portal and update your address details.
So for all those people who are moving from the Eastern Cape and from Gauteng to the Western Cape, they all need to register in the new address.
They must register against an address in the Western Cape, and we make their registration details available to parties on a monthly basis, so that parties have a sense of where areas of growth are in migration and migration out of certain provinces.
Okay, so here's a question from Chris, and we were actually trying to get him on, and I think you've more or less answered this in terms of foreign voters. But he says, I am registered to vote. I'm struggling to figure out how to vote from where I am abroad. He's in the UK. The VEC 10 deadline is not specified. The website is showing error messages. Within my direct circle, there are probably 200 other South Africans in the same situation, many more not registered yet, and they are at risk of not voting at all. So what can those people do?
Okay. And maybe working with you, we should be able to get maybe channels to communicate with experts overseas. For those who are overseas and not registered as voters, they will have an opportunity to register at their embassy or online once we announce the go live of our portal.
Okay.
I presume Chris is already registered in the UK. Because he's registered in the UK, and if he intends to vote in the UK, he no longer has a need to complete a VEC 10 form. A VEC 10 form was a form giving us notice that you are registered and you intend to vote in that embassy. So Chris no longer has to give us notice of a VEC 10 form. Yeah, but in January we'll have a lot more details, and would appreciate channels and websites that we could use to share information with South Africans abroad.
All right. So on election day itself, you have a hell of a job. Because that's your busiest day. You're responsible for all the election day activities, the result counting, the result processing, the result collation, seat allocation. So what kind of a day, when do you sleep and when do you wake up and when do you go to sleep on election day? Like what is that day like, and when last did your family see you?
I have it easier, and guys in national office and in provinces, maybe we have it easier. The guys who have it worse are guys at voting stations, because from Monday, they would be up from 4 in the morning to finalize their logistics to start dealing with special votes. And let me take a minute to deal with special votes.
Yes.
We have what we call special votes, which is in simple terms, prior voting. And there's 2 broad categories for prior voting. First are people who are physically unable to attend to a voting station. If you are disabled, infirm, or you are sick and confined to a place, you cause an application to be made on your behalf. We will come visit you at the place of confinement, and you vote with dignity from that place. The second category are people who know that they'll be away from their places of ordinary residence on voting day, so they'll vote on one of the 2 days before election day.
These are what, people going overseas, or people like, can I just say I'm not going to be home Saturday?
We don't even need a reason. You just tell us, I'm away.
Really?
Yeah, I'm away from my voting district. I apply for a special vote.
Okay.
And if we approve you,
how do you apply for a special vote?
It's simple. You apply by SMS, or you can even go onto our website and apply on our website. But that will only be available as soon as an election is called.
Okay.
So again, I mean, it seems to me that the IEC is trying to make it as easy as possible for people to vote. So why do we have people who make excuses? Oh, I'm going to be out of town. Oh, I'm on holiday. Oh, I've got to be at work. Oh, my leg is sore.
Public holiday.
You get a public holiday as well.
Yes.
So, I mean, there's no excuse here.
One thing that we must mention, if we don't mention, will be remiss. There was a provision in the past. We called it Section 24, capital A, which was a narrow departure from the rule that you register and vote where you are registered. Section 24A was introduced to continue to facilitate the continued franchise of people who were working on voting day. For example, people in emergency services or truck drivers who found themselves far from their area of registration. However, over time, that well-meaning narrow departure from the law has become abused to such an extent that in 2021, Parliament revised it. It repealed it. It is available, but only by prior notification in the date, in the timetable. So you can no longer walk into any voting station and say, here's proof that I'm registered. I want to vote at this voting station. So people who know that they will be away, either you working in the media, you covering election, on the day in the timetable, just send an SMS and indicate at which station you wish to vote. We'll make arrangement and approve your advance voting on that basis.
Well, here's Carl, who says he was a party agent in the last election. He got home at 3 a.m.
Yes.
And that's at a well-organized station. So it can get very long.
It gets very long. And if people lose, they'll insist on recounts. And you recount and recount. Yeah, so we have it easy. We'll have a moment to doze off on a chair. But the people at the voting station would have been up since Monday, 4 o'clock. If they have special votes on Monday and Tuesday, and on Wednesday, they must then pitch up again for election day, and they can't leave that station until they've issued a result for that station, which is, if they're lucky, like Carl says, at 3 o'clock. If you're in Sandton, Dunkeld West, by maybe 3 o'clock you'll be like you'll leave. If you are in tough areas, tough stations, you'll leave there Thursday. It's no exaggeration. Thursday after midday.
Now, Masego, what about those places that are difficult? You mentioned some of them are, there's some spots in South Africa where we haven't had outrageous election violence, but where we've had threats of violence or there have been incidents. What are you worried about? Because you have to be very aware of where there could be potential flashpoints. Providing a safe and free and fair election is also about security.
Indeed.
So what are you worried about? Because we've had people talk about KwaZulu-Natal, parts of Mpumalanga. Are there areas that you're paying special attention to make sure that everything runs smoothly?
It will be foolhardy and derelict not to do so.
Right.
We are worried by what we see as re-emergence of violence linked to elections in KZN. And the Commission has had interaction with parties in that part of the country, including the leadership of the South African Police Services, to say there's this worrying development. If they are not arrested soon, they may get out of hand. So we have commitments from all stakeholders that it's not in the best interest of anyone. However, our biggest worry is the misinformation, fake news, the misuse of social media to drive down participations in certain areas and to spread misinformation that is calculated to impact on voter behavior. And because we have so low levels of literacy on social media and information, we are worried that those things, the Cambridge Analytica tricks, might be unleashed in the South African context. Yes. We have started work with the major platforms. They've committed on a self-regulatory gentleman's agreement to try to help us to take down content which is established to be fake news and those type of things. So the test will be when the election is called, when the campaign starts in earnest, whether those agreements will be able to hold. Not because we want to do an easy job, but because we want people to cast their vote on an informed basis and not having been influenced by untruths.
Sure.
I just have one more question, Gareth.
Go ahead.
So so I have been at a couple of varsities where we were voting and the IEC was in charge. How do you determine whether you guys will be in charge of an election? How does one make like stuff like that? How do you ensure that elections go on in that lower levels?
Okay. We used to do SRC elections in varsities, almost wall to wall. But increasingly we are pulling out because those elections have now other interests more than just the interest of student population. They are almost a proxy battles for political parties.
Yeah.
The second thing is that our involvement was to work with SRCs and university administrators to also align their SRC constitution to be in line with the country constitution. So where we could not make headway, would withdraw assistance. Because, for example, you come to a varsity and they'll tell you, first years can't stand for SRC. It might be well-meaning, but it's no longer, that contest is no longer universal. It doesn't mean that a Masego who stayed 3 years at Wits and didn't progress up to second year, why should he have more rights to be SRC
So
member?
if you find it to be unconstitutional,
we'd work with them in the initial stages and they would agree, we'd change those things.
If they don't,
we'll say this doesn't meet the basic things for a free and fair election, so we'd rather not be involved.
Which universities are still under IEC?
Because most universities have now moved for a online form of SRC elections. We're no longer involved with administration of elections. We are there maybe as advisors or sounding boards. Yeah. But there are universities that refuse to do elections if we were not involved.
I don't envy you the task at hand, but I think it's hugely important what's going on here. And you've already administered 6 general elections. You've been involved in 6 of our general elections, so you know this stuff like the back of your hand.
So I will be involved in all. I've been involved since 2009.
Sure.
I don't have that much experience, but the good thing with the IEC is that we have a very low turnover rate of staff. So most of our staff would have been people who've been here from the formative years. Some cut their teeth in the DRC. So we have a cohort.
Have you ever had to fire anyone because they were actually secretly working for one of the parties?
At the level of a voting station, we fired people who behaved in a manner inconsistent with our code of conduct.
Really?
Yes. For example, in 2019, there was a presiding officer in KZN who was found to have stuffed the ballot box with marked ballots. Yes, and we dismissed them on the spot, but the matter went to court, and I think she was given a fine and a suspended custodial sentence. Yeah, so we take a very dim view of bad behavior because, look, a country can burn because of something that happens at a voting station.
Oh, yeah.
Can just one, I'm sure.
Sure. Go.
But ballot papers, you mentioned that there was like 7 countermeasures you guys put in place to prevent tampering. What are they? Can you tell us those?
I can tell you some, not all.
Okay.
For example, if you try to photocopy that, it will not give you anything. It will just write. It will just you'll have an image that says void.
Oh, really?
Yes. And if you use a magnifying glass, you'll find text there which we sometimes spell incorrectly deliberately, so that and there's a color combination on those things. So not as strong as a currency, but strong enough such that even if it falls in wrong hands, it can be reproduced. Or even if someone were to lay their hands on a plate, if they produce those ballots, we'll know that they're outside of the serial range that we know we must use for an election.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time. I've found this fascinating. I'm sure that lots of other people have plenty of comments about how important this kind of stuff is. Polly Fuller saying, thank you for this very informative show. Great stuff. And thank you to the IEC for being available. And thank you, Masego, for coming in to see us, because this is our country and we've got to make sure that we know how the elections work and what our role is in the elections, as well as the role of the IEC. But power to you. I hope that it goes very well. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Very good. We're hopefully helping to get people informed so they can make important decisions about their own futures. And that goes for you if you haven't registered yet to vote. There is still another opportunity coming up, right?
There is an opportunity coming up, yes.
Okay, there we go. So make sure you're ready to vote when the election rolls around in any time after May next year. Yeah. Thank you so much for the time that you've spent here, Masego Sheburi, the IEC's Deputy Chief Electoral Officer. And that is Democracy 101. First episode this morning and the first of many. Cheers, everybody.